The restaurant was buzzing with chatter when a simple waitress placed a plate in front of a young billionaire, only for him to freeze, his eyes widening as he shouted, "Stop! Who made this?" The entire restaurant fell silent. The sound of forks clinking against plates, the soft murmurs of conversations, all of it came to an abrupt halt. Everyone turned to look at the sharply dressed young man sitting at the VIP table, his expression a mix of shock and something deeper, something unspoken. Emma, the waitress who had just placed his meal in front of him, stood frozen in place. She swallowed hard, confused and startled. I'm sorry, sir. Is something wrong with the food?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The billionaire, Aiden Cole, didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pushed back his chair slightly, looking around the restaurant as if searching for someone. His piercing blue eyes then locked onto Emma. "Who made this dish?" he demanded, his voice firm but not unkind. Emma hesitated. "The head chef, I suppose," she answered uncertainly. Aiden shook his head, his expression unreadable. "Number this. This tastes exactly like something I had a long time ago, something only one person knew how to make." Emma blinked, unsure how to respond. The other waiters, managers, and even the kitchen staff peered out from behind the counter, waiting for his reaction. The tension in the air was thick. After a beat, Aiden took a slow breath, then stood up. "I need to speak to the chef. Now!" The restaurant manager rushed forward, his nervous energy palpable. "Mr. Cole, I assure you, our head chef is one of the best in the city. I don't care about titles," Aiden cut in sharply. "I just need to know who made this." Emma hesitated before saying, "I can take you to the kitchen." Aiden nodded, and without another word, he followed her. As they stepped into the kitchen, the smell of sizzling garlic and butter filled the air. The chefs turned to them in confusion, wiping their hands on their aprons. The head chef stepped forward, looking flustered. "Mr. Cole, what an honor! I hope everything is to your liking?" Aiden's gaze flickered over him before he said, "Who prepared this plate?" He held up the dish, his voice pressing for an answer. The head chef frowned. "Well, we have a team here." "I did," a soft voice interrupted. Aiden turned. A young assistant cook, barely in her 20s, stepped forward hesitantly, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked nervous under the billionaire's intense gaze. "I made it, sir." Aiden stared at her for a long moment before finally asking, his voice quiet but filled with something raw. "Where did you learn to make this?" The girl looked unsure but then said, "My mother taught me. She used to work in a small restaurant years ago before she—" Her voice faltered slightly. "Before she passed away." Aiden's breath hitched. His fingers tightened around the plate. His world shifted in that instant. Because he knew now, this wasn't just any meal. This was the same dish his childhood nanny used to make for him. And if this girl had learned it from her mother, then that meant— Aiden's heart pounded as he took a step closer. "What was your mother's name?" The young girl hesitated, then whispered, "Maria." Everything around Aiden faded. Maria. The woman who had raised him like her own son. The only person who had ever cared for him before she disappeared from his life. And now, standing right in front of him, was her daughter. Aiden felt a lump form in his throat as memories rushed back like a tidal wave. Maria, his nanny, his second mother, had vanished from his life when he was just a teenager. His parents had fired her without explanation, and no matter how much he'd begged for answers, they had refused to tell him where she had gone. He had searched for years, but every lead had turned into a dead end. And now, completely by chance, he had found her daughter. The young cook, Emma, shifted uncomfortably under his intense gaze. "Sir?" she asked hesitantly. Aiden blinked, realizing he had been staring at her in stunned silence. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. Your mother, Maria. She worked for a family before, didn't she? Emma hesitated, her brows furrowing. Yes, but I don't really know much about it. She never talked about it much. Aiden clenched his jaw. Of course, she wouldn't have. His family had probably made sure she never would. I knew her, Aiden admitted, his voice quieter now. She was like a mother to me. Emma's eyes widened in shock. You knew my mom? She whispered. Aiden nodded. He had so many questions, but one thing was clear. Emma had no idea who he was. The restaurant staff stood frozen, watching the interaction unfold. But Aiden didn't care. He turned to Emma and said, I need to talk to you. Privately. Emma looked at her manager, unsure if she could just leave in the middle of her shift. But before the manager could object, Aiden pulled out his sleek black credit card and placed it on the counter. Whatever she was supposed to make today, I'll cover it 10 times over, he said firmly. The manager's eyes widened, and he quickly nodded. Of course, sir. Take all the time you need. Emma hesitated, but finally removed her apron and followed Aiden out of the kitchen. They stepped outside, the cold evening air hitting them as they walked a few steps away from the restaurant's entrance. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, still overwhelmed. I don't understand. How do you know my mother? Aiden turned to her, his expression softening. She raised me. She was the only person in my house who ever cared about me. His voice grew heavier. And then, one day she was gone. My parents never told me why. I searched for her, but I could never find her. Emma's breath hitched. She always talked about a boy she used to care for. She said he was like a son to her. Aiden swallowed hard. And she never told you what happened? Emma shook her head. But I always felt like there was something she wasn't telling me. She used to get sad whenever I asked about her past. Aiden's heart ached. Is she still alive? Emma looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. She passed away a few years ago. Aiden closed his eyes, an unexpected pain gripping his chest. He had spent years searching for Maria, hoping that one day he could thank her, that he could repay her for all the love she had given him when no one else had. And now, he was too late. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Emma broke the silence. She would have been so happy to know you still remembered her, she said softly. Aiden exhaled, trying to steady himself. He looked at Emma, the daughter of the only person who had ever loved him unconditionally. And in that moment, he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just walk away. Aiden couldn't shake the weight pressing on his chest. He had spent years searching for Maria, hoping to thank her, to tell her what she had meant to him. But now she was gone, and all that remained was the daughter she had left behind. Emma watched him carefully, still processing everything. I don't understand, she finally said. Why did you shout like that back there? What made you react that way? Aiden hesitated before reaching into his wallet. He pulled out a small, worn-out photograph, one he had kept with him for years. He handed it to Emma. She took it hesitantly and gasped the moment she saw it. It was an old picture of Maria, standing in a sunlit garden, holding the hand of a small boy. The boy had bright eyes and messy brown hair. Aiden. Emma's fingers trembled. This was you? Aiden nodded. That's the only picture I have of her. I've carried it with me ever since she left. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She had this exact photo, she whispered. She kept it in a little box with her most precious things. Aiden felt his throat tighten. Maria had never forgotten him, just as he had never forgotten her. A sudden gust of wind blew past them, and Emma shivered slightly. Aiden immediately shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, the same way Maria used to do for him whenever he was cold. Emma looked up at him, her lips parted in surprise. "I want to help you," Aiden said suddenly. "I don't know how much you're struggling, but if you need anything, money, a job, a home, I'll make sure you have it." Emma stiffened and took a step back. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Aiden met her gaze. "I know enough," he said simply. "I know that you're Maria's daughter, and that's enough for me." Emma hesitated, conflict clear in her expression. "I don't want charity." Aiden let out a small chuckle. "It's not charity. It's a way for me to repay the woman who raised me." His voice softened. "And it's the least I can do." Emma's eyes searched his face for a long moment before she sighed. I don't know what to say." Aiden smiled. "Then don't say anything. Just let me help." For the first time that night, Emma allowed herself to smile back. And in that moment, Aiden knew. This was only the beginning. In the days that followed, Aiden made sure Emma had everything she needed. He arranged for her to move into a comfortable apartment, one far better than the tiny, run-down place she had been living in. He also offered her a job, not out of pity, but because he recognized the same fire in her that he had once seen in Maria. Emma was hesitant at first, unwilling to accept too much from him, but when Aiden showed her the position, a role as a project coordinator in his company, she realized it wasn't a handout. It was a chance to prove herself, to build something of her own. "I'll take the job," she told him firmly, "but I want to earn my place here." Aiden grinned. "That's exactly what your mother would have said." Days turned into weeks, and Emma thrived in her new role. She was smart, resourceful, and determined. Employees who once dismissed her as just another hire quickly realized she was someone to be reckoned with. But as she worked harder, she found herself spending more time with Aiden. They had lunch together, brainstormed ideas late into the evening, and laughed over memories of Maria. One night, as they sat across from each other in his office, Emma asked the question that had been lingering in her mind. "Why did my mom leave? If she cared about you so much, why didn't she ever come back?" Aiden's expression darkened. He exhaled deeply and leaned back in his chair. "I don't know the full story," he admitted. "All I know is that one day she was gone. My foster parents told me she had to leave for personal reasons, but they never explained what those reasons were." Emma frowned, a strange sense of unease creeping over her. "That doesn't make sense. My mom never mentioned leaving anyone behind. She always told me she had no family." Aiden's jaw tightened. "That's what I thought, too." A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Then Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced down and saw a message from an unknown number. "You're getting too close. Stop digging into Maria's past." Her breath caught in her throat. She immediately looked up at Aiden, her face pale. "Something isn't right," she whispered. Aiden took the phone from her and read the message. His face hardened. "We need to find out the truth," he said. Emma nodded, her heart pounding. Neither of them knew that what they were about to uncover would change everything. Aiden wasted no time. He called in favors, hired private investigators, and personally went through old records. Emma, on the other hand, began searching through her mother's belongings, old letters, diaries, anything that could hold the missing pieces of the puzzle. Days passed, and the deeper they dug, the stranger things became. Maria had left behind no official records of her early years. There were no school transcripts, no birth certificates, nothing. It was as if she hadn't existed before a certain point in her life. Then, one evening, Emma found something. An old, tattered envelope hidden inside a jewelry box. Inside was a letter written in her mother's handwriting. If you're reading this, it means my past has caught up with me. There are things I never wanted you to know. Things that could put you in danger. I had to leave someone behind, someone I cared for deeply, but it was the only way to protect him. If you ever find him, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I never forgot. Emma's hands shook as she read the letter again. She was talking about you, she whispered to Aiden. She was protecting you. Aiden took the letter, his expression unreadable. But from what? Before Emma could respond, a loud knock sounded at the door. Aiden and Emma exchanged wary glances before he moved to open it. A tall man in a suit stood on the other side, his face grave. You need to come with me, the man said, handing Aiden an old photo. We found something. Aiden's breath caught. The photo was of Maria, but she wasn't alone. She stood beside a man who looked eerily similar to him. Same piercing blue eyes, same strong jawline. Who is this? Aiden asked. The man hesitated. Your father. Emma gasped. But, Aiden, you said you never knew your parents. Aiden's hands curled into fists. I didn't. The man sighed. That's because he didn't want you to. A heavy silence filled the room. Emma looked at Aiden, fear and curiosity battling inside her. What does this mean? She asked. Aiden clenched his jaw, staring at the photo. It means everything we thought we knew was a lie.